Hi guys, this is Prakriti.
This is Shrishti, and welcome to the Wabi Sabi podcast.
So, to give a little introduction, Wabi Sabi literally translates to the idea of beauty in imperfections, which very well encapsulates the essence of our aim behind the podcast. We pursue to explore the various facets of mental health and social emotional learning and their interlinkage with other aspects of life. We thought of Wabi Sabi as we worked at Unbottled Emotions and wondered how we could deliver interesting content in the best ways. So, I guess here we are.
With this series of podcasts, we plan to normalize the discussion about mental health, its various nuances, and their interaction with different fields of life.
Depression, anxiety, and a whole host of other mental health issues caused by social factors can contribute to coming in conflict with the law. And it can be good for the sufferer and for the community in the longer term. For the efforts to be diverted towards help rather than penalization under the usual sentencing regime.
All right, so our speaker for today is Maitri Mishra. She is the founding member of Project 39A, a group that uses empirical research to re examine practices and policies in the criminal justice system and aims to trigger new conversation on legal aid, torture, forensics, mental health in prisons, and the death penalty. I believe you bring a novelty to this discussion with your research and work at Project 39A, and I'm sure this will be an amazing session.
Hi,
Hi,
Maitre.
hi, guys. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to talk about my work. There is not a lot of conversation which happens on mental health and criminal justice, and I thank you for being a platform where this conversation can be expanded to a much larger audience, which is non-law. So thanks.
Let's get into it.
Sure. So, Maitri, you work at the intersection of criminal law and society. In that way, I'm sure you have come to develop your set of observations and opinions. Then let's begin by understanding how do you think criminal law comes into play when we speak of mental health and growth?
So there are multiple pathways through which persons with mental health concerns come into conflict with law or are implicated in the criminal justice system. One of the pathways is penalization of having a mental health concern, and but the pathway that I work in is looking at persons with mental health disorders or mental health concerns which have come in conflict with law, which may not have a direct connection to their mental health. Of course, there are multiple times where mental health concerns of prisoners, of accused, go unnoticed by criminal law and its processes and its structures. And I and Project 39A aim to bring those stories of those people, the rights of the people out into the open, because I think they are as essential part of society as we are.
So I'll actually I wanted to say a little thing. So you know how I think the thing when we discuss mental health that comes is people automatically assume it's somebody with an illness. But when we talk of it, how WHO describes health is actually not the absence of ailment, but a perfectly well-adjusted body and mind. And I think that's one of the issues that we end up facing when we discuss even mental health with the intersection of criminal law. Am I right? Am I fine with
Yeah,
that?
absolutely. Absolutely. I don't think the criminal justice system has adequately addressed mental health concerns. It hasn't even adequately addressed mental illness or mental disorders. So, and that's the reason why I use the term mental health concerns, because mental health I see on a sliding scale where you could have, I don't want to say you're functioning properly because I don't think that's the correct framework, but it goes from having good mental health to mental health concerns which impair or affect your functioning and perception and navigation of the world, and that needn't be attached only to mental health disorders. I'll give you an example from just our lives, like
Yeah.
lives of people in the free community. When we get stressed and when we have anxiety, things affect us differently. They have a much more magnified effect on us.
That's
In
right.
that sense, the interaction and the effect of the criminal justice system, particularly prisons, and since you mentioned the WHO, uh, they have a discourse talking about how prisons affect mental health of prisoners.
Yeah.
The law has recently started addressing it, where even the Supreme Court, in one of its recent cases, acknowledged that prisons for sure have an effect on the mental health of persons, and it simultaneously acknowledged that criminal law is not equipped to deal with all mental health concerns, which
Yeah.
to me is a bit of a problem because you might have identified the problem, you are yet not moving towards solutions, preventative as well as, in a way, curative.
Right. Now, many researchers have come to the conclusion that crime is a social problem and that social factors impact the possibility of someone coming in conflict with the law. Like, what are some of these risk factors that we see and need to look out for?
Right. So, the work that our project has done and a previous project that we had done shows us that a large majority of prisoners, in our context, prisoners sentenced to death, come from disadvantaged socioeconomic communities. Now, what do those settings do to these people, right?
Yeah.
So, in terms of risk factors and protective factors, given we know that there is widespread poverty in the country. Now we can look at poverty as a broad brush stroke, but there are elements to that which are much more granular, affect a person at a much more individual level, such as we've found that many of our prisoners who are on death row have faced physical or emotional abuse. They have faced neglect from their families, not intentionally, but because those families have members who have to work harder, they stay out of the house for much longer. So, children who grow up in those conditions,
Yes.
they are exposed to certain risk factors. These risk factors could range from being exposed to domestic violence, being both witnessed and experienced. They could be linked to severe deficient provision of public goods such as healthcare or education. Let me take an example of education.
Sure.
Now, let's talk about what education does to children. It promotes peer interaction. In our current system, it might provide a source of some nutrition to the child. It allows the child to have experiences which are age appropriate. Now, a lot of the prisoners we spoke to, because of the financial constraints they come from, they had to drop out of education and enter the workforce. And this workforce is populated by people who are much older to them. So they are influenced by things around them, right? Now, if a child is not given the resources to develop, I suppose, in an age appropriate way, the risk factors then become even more magnified. And we know from research that these are risk factors not just for mental health concerns, but they are linked to people coming in conflict with law and further violence. So you see that the risk factors for mental health, the lack of protective factors for mental health concerns to come up are the same, largely the same as those which lead to later on violent behavior. So both health and social outcomes are linked to our environment, our social environment that we are exposed to and grow up in.
So,
Right.
so I was a very hipster child when I was studying in college, and I took this course called Film and Law, which I thought would be an easy grade, but turns out not so. And we watched this movie, like this is for the listeners. There's this popular movie called Taxi Driver. I'm sure most of you have heard of it. Like personally, I think it does a really good job in showing how the social factors impact your life and how that may lead to certain decisions that you take. So for example, they show how watching pornography is actually really normalized because they have these movie theaters where men can just walk in and for a few cents they can watch pornography. And then at the same time, when you step out and you see on the footpath these people are being crass to women, or there's this normalization of violence. against women.
Can I just make an interjection there?
Yeah,
There's a lot of conversation about the links between pornography and sexual violence,
yeah,
right? But I don't think it's as simple as that, because the pornography that people are exposed to largely are violent pornographies. They
yeah,
show women as largely passive subjects. Now, if you have an environment which can counter that and explain to you that violence against women should not be normalized,
yeah,
then those effects can be, I wouldn't say mitigated, but there is an alternative story and worldview that you are exposed to. And violence in that sense is all around, right?
yeah,
You're exposed to domestic violence, and there is enough research to say that violence is also intergenerational, because that's how you internalize what women look like, what your response to them should be. And that's one of the, I suppose, concerns with patriarchy and patriarchal societies.
yeah, yeah. So I think there is this study, right, that says that trauma can be inherited through generations. I think it was in the context of slavery and black people in USA, but I think that applies a lot in India also.
Absolutely. I don't think populations are different in that sense. Uh, you see violence, you are exposed to violence, you develop severe experiences which you might not classify as PTSD. They're still
Yeah,
trauma. And you are transmitting it to your children, how your children internalize that environment, and they too then internalize trauma. In that sense, I think it does become intergenerational. The stories that children are exposed to, the environment that children are exposed to, is going to lead to trauma in children and their children.
so I'll discuss something like another really interesting thing with you. So when we talk about stereotypes, right? So let's like I'll take an example when I discuss this. Let's imagine there is a man with like multiple tattoos on one arm. And
Right,
so we automatically, I think, as a society, just kind of imagine him. Our first impression is that he's a little dicey.
right.
So this works out in crime also, like criminology when we study. We call this the labeling theory. It's when people who do not conform with the social standards, they are labeled as deviants. And when social immobility does not allow them to change, they end up accepting that terminology and showing behavior accordingly. What do you think of that? Do you think we see it in India?
Absolutely. I mean, we see it in our daily lives, where you're constantly telling the child you're good for nothing. The child believes that, the person believes that, and then conforms that behavior to that label. So it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, yeah,
And in terms of the interaction with criminal justice system, you're absolutely right. The social opportunities that you don't get because you're looked at a certain way, the rejection that you face, the problems that you face, push you to a worldview which is extremely negative. And when opportunities are not there, what does one do?
yeah,
Does one for and this is for survival for many people. This is a concern for becomes a concern for how they would survive, even financially or
yeah,
socially, in a society which has rejected them, refusing to give them a chance. And it's the same with prisoners, right? Or
yeah.
accused persons. Once you're implicated in the criminal justice system, you are there's a scar for life. You almost have no to little chance of getting rid of that, what you might call a label.
That was indeed a very good example which you talked about, wherein you talked about this man with a lot of tattoos. And I think a lot of people will be able to relate to this and understand this in a better way. Now, my next query revolves around your work, Maitri, your Project 39A. Your work with Project 39A involves a lot of interaction with the prisoners and the prison authorities. And for that matter, the National Crime Reports Bureau has come out with the prison statistics of India in 2019. There, they claim that there were 165 unnatural deaths in prisons, 116 of which were suicides. This is when, in the majority of deaths, we don't even know the cause. So they don't form part of the statistics which I just spoke about. So, what are the prison conditions like? Are they a factor in making the mental health of the occupants worse?
Yes. Suicides in prison. Now, there are multiple attributes of a life in prison that lead to that. Now, there is a very common and well accepted idea which is called the pains of imprisonment. What it talks about is the kind of deprivations that affect a person's personality. As punishment, we might think of it as a very objective purpose of criminal law, but actually, what does it do to the person? What are their experiences, right? Violence, and both physical and psychological. They have little support from their pre-existing support systems, which are largely their families. Persons who have been accused of or commit certain offenses, particularly sexual offenses, have little to no support or opportunity to form communities in prison. They are reviled by other prisoners, right? So there is a hierarchy there as well.
Right.
Living in such a situation where you have no recourse to positive experiences, very few prisoners have positive experiences. I'm not denying the positive experiences, but largely there is a lot of pain, there is a lot of violence, there is lack of any support. What do you do in that? And we know all of these things are risk factors, even in the free community. When they become consistent and persistent, when you yourself look at the contribution you're making to the family, you look at yourself as a burden. Particularly in India, it is very common because families spend a lot of money to meet the prisoners. So they are anyway coming from a economically disadvantaged position. So a support system is taken away. The prisoner, especially say death row prisoners who can't work, they have no financial, if I can call it that, independence. They are dependent on their families. Now, even suicide, right? There is a theory on suicide, which is the interpersonal theory, where you you perceive yourself as being a burden, and you also perceive that you are not wanted. Both of these work together, and it's very, very common among prisoners. It doesn't take much to imagine that this would be the experience of prisoners. But my issue with reporting only suicides is that it does not capture the large number of people who might have attempted suicide. And that then means that you are not addressing, you're not even acknowledging that there are attempts. You're not acknowledging that a lot of prisoners are thinking about dying by suicide. Apart from suicide, you have the whole gamut of non suicidal self injury. So these are different forms of self harm, of uh, pathways to suicide that we have completely glossed over. We hear a lot about overcrowding, bad food, bad hygiene. Yes, that is of course there, but along with that is this rejection by society, rejection by a community. What do you think is going to happen to such prisoners? It's a very dark space that they live in, and we might look at them as persons who deserve to be in prison, but they have multiple aspects to them. You have to also recognize their humanity.
Right.
Yes, have they committed a heinous offense? Have they harmed another person? Of course, that's why they are being convicted, and that's why they are now in prison. But their lives don't stop there. They need to be able to create a positive life and experience inside prisons. And I don't think that's necessarily a very difficult exercise.
I
It
think
just
that's sorry.
go
I
ahead.
was just saying that I think that's true because I think people forget that your Article 21, your right to life with dignity, applies even when you go to prison.
Right.
And that is like a really big dissonance that we face in terms of social standards, I guess. Yeah,
Now, as far as Article 21 rights are concerned vis-a-vis prisoners,
yeah,
um, it's a great aspirational statement. But do we really aspire to that? By we, I mean the state. And I don't think
yeah.
so. I think the state puts way too many restrictions, which dehumanize the person. And even the idea of dignity, it's a very individual dignity. Like if you look at, okay, let me give you an example from my experience working with death row prisoners. We met a few prisoners who were very keen to not be restricted to just death row prisoners, right?
Yeah.
They have stories, they have lives, but restricting them to just an idea of a prisoner is, I don't know if it's taking away their dignity, because again, dignity is a very personal concept, but it's certainly dehumanizing them. And I think that is a lens that is useful in looking at prisoners. We try to snatch away their dignity. So it's upon us. We dehumanize them and they are trying to reclaim their humanity. So it's a,
Yeah, plus
yeah,
there's like no sense of privacy, I guess. These people have no sense of control over their own lives. Then you have
right,
things like solitary confinement, which are obviously supremely mentally
right.
traumatic. And I think in we've come to believe that the harsher the punishment, the more deterrence for a crime. But I don't think that's how it necessarily pans out.
Right, absolutely right. One idea of deterrence is how do you gauge deterrence? That's one thing.
Yeah.
And the other idea is, who are you deterring? You're aiming to deter people who are very much part of your society. And unless we interrogate and examine how our social norms, our social structures affect and respond to them, it remains a question of who are you deterring. Now, what is it that you're deterring is another question. Are you deterring crimes that happen most frequently, or are you restricting your deterrence to extreme violence, say violence against the human body? So, is your idea of deterrence, what is it based on? What are you trying to say as a criminal justice policy? How do you gauge what you're going to deter? And as far as harsher punishments is concerned, I think it's an excellent ploy by this employed by the state to say we've done our bit. Look at this statute. We've increased the punishment, and you must be happy that we've done that. And let me not address the underlying conditions which lead to violence. So I think it's an excellent ploy, and we know it works. And it's a political ploy. And people look at you as persons who can save society, but punishment does not save social behavior.
Yeah. I read this about Japan somewhere. They have this model called reintegrative shaming, which basically means that you talk about the person's behavior and not their like what who they are as a person. And like if you focus on the actions itself and you tell them where they went wrong, and the intervention happens on multiple levels, and that has shown good results. Do you think that is something that we can do in India?
Why not? If it can be done in other countries, why can we not look at our incarcerated population from that lens? And it's not just behavior, it's also the worldview that they may have been exposed to. So a
Yeah.
lot of those underlying processes have to be addressed, and I think, of course, we should be doing that. Now, one concern could be that we are a severely under-resourced country when it comes to providing these services. I don't think that can be an excuse. If Article 21 is a non-negotiable right, if dignity
Yeah.
is a non-negotiable right, then resources cannot come in the way of saying that we simply cannot do this. We cannot engage in uh, intentional and effective and helpful processes and activities to reform or understand that person. It's only once you understand the person will you be able to engage with them. No attempt is really made to understand the incarcerated population and individuals at that level. They're criminals. Like let's just look at them as criminals, as people who have nothing else attached to them. You judge them by one action, and that's about it.
And no chance of redemption in any way, of
Yeah,
growing in
and
any way.
absolutely, absolutely.
Okay, so Light Up, for example, works a lot with at this place called the Sanjay Camp, and they work with a lot of children in red light areas, and they have
Mm.
seen that in such risk prone areas, the possibility is just so much higher for these children to ever like to face terrible things in life, and that might end up putting them at risk. And I don't think we have very great protective measures in place for these kids also, because we
Yes,
hear about I don't know, like we hear it in the news a lot, right? The orphanages where kids were sexually abused, the juvenile homes where they were abused. And is there a lack of
Right.
accountability?
Given the number of stories that are coming out about abuse and unhygienic conditions in homes, yes, there is no accountability. Our criminal justice system does not hold itself accountable. It doesn't want to. Prisons are one of the most opaque systems, and so are juvenile homes and all of these places. And the moment there is opacity, it's an acknowledgement that we don't want to be held accountable. So yeah, so there is a lack of accountability, and I think it's somewhere a little bit intentional. Even in general, right? Even in middle class, upper class societies, children are not really engaged with as people with developing minds and experiences and diverse experiences. They are just children who need to follow the rules. And with children who are exposed to even more risk factors, they don't have any rules either. So in that sense, whether it's children in red light areas or children who live on the streets, and especially children who live on the streets, we know that they are much higher risk of being sexually abused. So
Yeah.
that's the experience throughout. Then they become receptors of violence of all sorts.
So I have like a really important question at this point, which is, so the Ministry of Home Affairs has constituted a national level committee for reform of criminal laws, right?
Right.
And so this, like after all that we've discussed here, what would you say are your expectations from the new committee?
What are my current expectations? I would
Please,
have to say none.
please go into details. We're all good with it.
No, yeah, I would say I don't have any expectations from this committee. I think when, especially when criminal law is concerned and you are not involving stakeholders such as people who are going to get affected by the law, people who've been working in these spaces, people who have certain amount of expert knowledge. Once, if you're not going to meaningfully engage with them and take on their views, you are not going to get a. I suppose if reform is being said in a positive way, you're not going to get a reformed law. When you're so distant from actual experiences, it is necessarily going to be a bad process leading to bad laws. And participation is a key political exercise. And if we don't have effective participation, you are never going to create laws which help. Let me put it that way.
Yeah, I don't think we have any. Do we have women representation now post all the outrage?
No, the only gender and sex represented are males. They are men who have had largely protected lives, who are in powers of position, and and without having diverse perspectives, without having not just why just women, uh, the trans community, people who've had different experiences, people who work with children who come in conflict with the law. You are essentially turning a blind eye to actual experiences. And in doing that, what could any expectations look like? Now, you could say that they have engaged in a process where they are open to comments from different experts and different people and the general public. The problem with this is this criminal law reform, and I put reform in quotes, committee, is that there is no actual engagement where people can exchange views,
Yeah.
right? And that's crucial to hear from people. And it's all an online process. It's got a very, very short window. It's all in English. So these processes itself are excluding access. And to me, crucially, participation means getting people together in a room and hearing their views and exchanging views with them. Without them, if everything is just paper and pen or whatever, computers and laptops, those experiences are not heard, those experiences are not internalized. So yeah, so that's another problem. Like the exercise on receiving general comments is an empty exercise.
So, when sociology, when we used like first semester, we used to have sociology, and we used to have this subsection called Women in Law. And they used to discuss how, for the longest time, the legislators did not consider that women could commit crime for two reasons. One was that, okay, they're too docile, they're too gentle to ever commit a crime.
Hmm.
And two, it's because they are in the kitchen and therefore know how to clean their tracks better. And I think this is the kind of ridiculous assumptions that come up when you draft laws without the representation from women.
Exactly. Now, let me give you an actual example, right?
Yeah.
The Domestic Violence Act.
Yes.
It's drafted by people who have worked with women who have faced domestic violence of all sorts.
Yeah.
Uh, and that kind of participation is reflecting in the bill when in the act when it's not a penal act. It's trying to provide safety for. It's not trying to. Its aim is to provide safe spaces for women and ensuring that they are not deprived. I mean, deprived is not a nice word, but they have no access to any resources. That the act prevents that from happening. Because if violence in the kind of violence they face is criminalized, they are then left with nothing, in the sense that perhaps a lot of women are dependent on their husbands for income. And once you take the
Yeah.
husband away, where's the income? So it leaves the woman at more disadvantage than they were, at least economically. So you can see that laws do get more effective, they are better, they are more directed to what is the requirement when you have that participation. Of late, you have the Transgender Act, ridiculous provisions, even
Yeah.
more barriers. And the government and the state steadfastly, determinedly did not engage with the community.
They just bulldozed through it.
Yeah. So your experiences don't matter because we know best.
Okay, yeah, fair enough.
So, Maitri, what would be your words of hope for you to convey something to our audience? What would be?
I know I've painted a very despairing picture of prisons, of the criminal justice system, and it is a very problematic area. But I think people can work towards it. You have NGOs who are working with prisoners in prisons, trying to influence prison administration, and those are all very positive things that are happening. They are currently happening at targeted prisons at a smaller scale, necessarily because of resource constraints of NGOs, all of that. But I think change is happening, and it will continue to happen. I mean, if we lose hope, then how do we do anything? If we say that nothing can be done about this,
Right.
A, you're giving up an opportunity, and B, you're letting the system win. And in terms of hopeful stories of prisoners, there was a prisoner in our project that we came across. He's a death row prisoner. And what he said to me was, it really struck and it stuck with me. He said that before he entered prison, he was, and it's his words, he was like an animal. He didn't know how to be, he didn't know how to behave, and he would get into brawls and fights. But once he came into prison and he got structure and he got the opportunities that he had lacked before prison, he says he's a changed person, that prison has actually brought about a positive change. He has a mentor of sorts who has encouraged him to undertake education, to do more work, engage in prison activities. So I do think there are rays of hope. I do think some prisoners have had, they might be in the minority, but there
Right.
is a shot at making prison a relatively better experience. And some prisoners are looking at it like that, because simply because they haven't had those opportunities before prison. So I think there is a lot of hope. At least that's how I approach my work, that every little thing that I do matters. Even this conversation where the reach outreach would be much wider. Even just information dissemination,
Right.
letting people know these are the problems, that's a step towards people saying, I will do something about it. So I think these things might appear very small in the larger picture, but it's the small things that start making the change and working towards that.
The first step to solving a problem is identifying there is one. So, yeah,
Right.
Exactly.
I get what you mean.
I think
Also,
after this, our audience will get a really nice perspective to it, and I'm really sure they would want to learn more about it and look at a better side of improving the situation. So we thank you, Maitri, for this discussion, and we are really grateful for your time and providing us with all the insights, which we
Thank
normally
you
do
so
not
much.
think about, actually. Yeah. Thank you so much again.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me this platform. I would just when you spoke of hope, there's a it's an American website, so unfortunately those have only American stories. But there's a website called the Marshall Project. It has stories by prisoners about their experience in prison and how they have found friends in prison, how they've had positive experiences. There are negative stories, but some prisoners have written positive stories. So if anyone wants to check out good stories, it's an American site, but it's still an interesting insight into a prisoner's life, I think.
We can definitely put up the link in our description below, I guess. That'll be really great for our audience to look into. And to our listeners, if you have any recommendations or any queries, please hit up us on Instagram at Unbottled Emotions. And this has been Trishti.
and this was Prakriti here at Wabi Sabi. We'll see you next episode.
Bye.
Bye.